Welcome everybody. It's a very sunny day out here. I don't know what it's on your side. I hope it's sunny in whatever way. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to what is it, number 87 of our webinars. And today we have Niall McGovern, nowadays a colleague to me, one of the product managers at 4PS. He did this presentation at Days of Knowledge in Birmingham, which I didn't attend this year. And especially, I mean, Copilot AI is a very hot topic, and I was very interested. And to my dismay, I wasn't able to join his session at Days of Knowledge, but I was very happy he immediately stepped in when he suggested to do this as an Areopa recording, because to me, in the end, everything we do is functional. I mean, we have a lot of technical things, and our presentations here, many of our webinars are about technology, but they're all there to support functional wishes. And well, typically Niall picked up himself the gauntlet to go and look at business opportunities, the business scenario. So I'll leave the rest to you now, but I'm very happy that you joined in. And before I'm going to hand over to you, standard a number of slides on some practical things. Everybody present, be welcome, like always, to be interactive, although we have the constraint of having your mic muted and let you feed in your questions on the question window. I agreed with Niall. There are three points in the presentation where he will be switching between topics where we will then give room to the questions. I will pick them up. I'm Luc van Vugt, the moderator of today, and I picked those instances to pick questions from your list. So feel free to feed them in the window anytime. The recording, I will do my best to get it processed somewhere between ending of today and tomorrow morning to get everything in. Niall is going to share a number of links in the presentation, which I will add to the description of the recording. So you will know where to find things that he's referencing, or easily get to the things he's referencing. If you didn't subscribe yet to our newsletter, be welcome to do so. Use this simple URL. If you can't click on it, you can easily quickly type it or find it on our website too. And as almost last one, a look forward to what is next in the coming month. We'll have a break in Northern Hemisphere summertime, and that will start just after July 8, and we'll be back in the start of September. You can see there already have been 5 webinars planned up ahead, and still everything is open to anything following this. So if you have topics, speakers, be free to come up with them. And before I'm going to hand over to you, Niall, I want to thank ForNav again for being our sponsor and enabling us to be using this platform, GoToWebinar. So I'm going to make you presenter, Niall, and then you should be able to share your screen. Yeah.
Super. Thank you very much, Luc.
You're more than welcome.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the webinar, and thanks, Luc, for inviting me to take part. Today we're going to talk about finding fit-to-business scenarios regarding Microsoft Copilot and AI. And before we get started, I just want to show you the agenda. We're going to start by looking at some of the capabilities that Microsoft has introduced within the last 9 to 12 months in Business Central primarily, what's available now and what's coming next. We're then going to switch to business scenarios, so taking inspiration and insight from what we've seen from Microsoft. Where might we find scenarios with our customers, as functional consultants, for example, where Copilot and AI could provide a fit, and indeed where are there situations where it mightn't be such a good fit. And then we'll wrap up with a short section on costs and licensing, which can be confusing and rapidly changing, just to give everybody a snapshot of where we stand today with what's included in BC, for example, and what isn't. This is me. I'm a product manager at 4PS, and I've been there since the start of 2022, but I've been in the business software world for a considerably longer time than that. Based in Ireland, unlike the Netherlands, it is raining here today, but we hope we get your sunshine tomorrow, Luc. It would be nice. And I've mainly worked in roles that are very much on the boundary between technical, business process, user needs, so a little bit technical, a little bit functional, and hopefully that's a good perspective for what we're going to cover today. In case you haven't been keeping up to date with all things Copilot, even though there is a very large amount of attention on it at the moment, Microsoft Copilot specifically is an AI-based digital assistant within Microsoft applications. Not just in Business Central, it's available in the Power Platform, in Microsoft 365, there's Copilot Studio, you can find it in your Edge browser. It's appearing in many, many places as an assistant, a digital assistant for users of these Microsoft applications. And it's really to help users to be more productive, but also to remove potentially time-consuming, laborious activities, or indeed to just find ways to generate content more quickly, to gain insights more quickly. And it's a new way to interact, particularly the chat format, which is the one that tends to get the most attention, is a new way to interact with business software. One thing to bear in mind, however, is that the user is still always responsible and in control. And the little catchphrase I have for this is, it's Copilot, not pilot or autopilot. So you, as the user, are still always responsible for reviewing the responses that you get from, or indeed the data suggestions that you get, and either keeping them or discarding them. So that's something to bear in mind throughout. So let's move on to what's available at the moment and indeed what's coming next. So this is with a focus on Business Central. First of all, throughout this, I'm going to be sort of referring back to the concepts that are involved. So not just the functionality itself, but what are the sort of, what are the things that Microsoft have done, and what are the examples of the scenarios that they're addressing with them more conceptually. And as I try to kind of put the different capabilities or the different things you could do with AI in Business Central in categories, I think of three particular categories. One is the category of generating content. So this is where you're taking existing data in Business Central for a given entity, and you're using it to create natural language content, text, essentially. The second is act, so taking an AI-assisted action at the user's request to either help reduce time or increase accuracy. So it's AI put into the application for a really specific purpose, as opposed to a more general chat type scenario. And the last category is chat. This is where you're going from textual input or human natural language input on behalf of the user to insights, information, data that is being returned. So those are, it helps as we work through business scenarios as well, thinking more broadly of things we could do, capabilities we could build, to put them kind of into these categories. These are the different types of things that AI can help you with in Business Central. Before you get started in Business Central with the existing capabilities, you do need to do some setup. The Copilot and AI capabilities page is where the various AI-powered features are activated and deactivated. You can also see there which items are in production-ready preview at any given time and which ones are generally available. So this list will continue to evolve throughout the current release wave. So there are at least another couple of items coming that are not yet released in preview. You may find as things emerge initially as well that there'll be something in feature management that you may need to turn on. I checked yesterday, there's nothing in the BC 24.0 environment that I've got at the moment that is in feature management, but in the past, as things come through initially, there may be an action to enable it there. As it becomes more established, it then is in Copilot and AI capabilities only, but it's worth checking both if you're setting something up just to make sure you've covered it. So within the category of generate that I talked about a moment ago, there's one capability that's there at the moment, and that's the marketing text suggestions. That's the one that's been around the longest as well, since late last year. And this is where you've probably seen it in numerous demos and presentations at this stage, but it's the one where you can produce a marketing text on the basis of item data, and then adjust the tone of it, various attributes, emphasizing various attributes of the item while saying, you know, don't include others. Change the tone to be more formal, change the format into sort of a LinkedIn post type format or a more formal business document, all based on item data without needing to you know, draft any text yourself. It's a very new concept, but that's the one that falls under the generate category. If we move on to the taking action category, there are many more. Reconciling your bank accounts with Copilot, so doing your bank rec automatically using Copilot as opposed to using the automatic bank rec based on coding that was there already. Mapping e-documents to purchase order lines with Copilot, a very similar thing around, again, matching essentially, and creating sales lines easily with Copilot. So this is suggesting sales order, quote, invoice lines based on structured input or natural language. There's also using a prompt to generate analysis views, which is a really nice one. And there's one that's not there yet, but coming soon, which is generating item-related information, for example, item variants using Copilot. So that's the ACT category. And if we just have a look at a few of those, the reconcile bank accounts, the concept here really is using an AI to identify relationships in existing data in Business Central where it would be otherwise difficult or time consuming for a user to match them. Likewise, the next one, data matching, where there's lots of data and potentially not very obvious connections between them that the Copilot and AI is able to identify better. Creating the sales lines easily, getting your line suggestions. You can see there you've got some suggested prompts as well. This is an example of using a combination of master data and historical activity in BC, as well as, I guess you could say, those prompts from the user to propose relevant new data while saving the user time. And meanwhile, getting into insights, this is the analysis tab. When you go to a page, the analysis option on a list page in Business Central, which I will show you in a moment, you've got the option to enter a query and then generate an analysis view based solely on the text that you enter, which is quite powerful, and certainly it's a time-saving thing, but also complexity. You know, I know many of you may, and many of your customers may be familiar with working in Excel and doing pivots and so on, but it's not necessarily always something that you can that people have picked up, you know, from the start. It may be that there's new staff, for example, who are not yet fully up to speed, and it's really useful to be able to go to something like item ledger entries and you know, go into this into analysis mode. And sorry, I'm in the wrong one. I've gone for the other analysis button. I'm not used to the new buttons yet. We go to Copilot, create a new analysis, and say total by item number and group by entry type, for example. And then away you go, and it'll go and generate a new analysis view for you based upon simply upon the text that you've entered. At least hopefully it will. This is a sandbox. It may take a moment for it to reach a conclusion. And here we go. And it's just created a new analysis tab, exactly like as if I created it as I attempted to do manually. And I can save this, I can do all the same things. I can copy a link to it just like I could if I did it manually. Yes, so that's that one. Then we have creating product information faster. This is one that's not released yet, but it's suggesting variants, also units of measure, dimensions, all supposedly coming in July is the expected preview for that. And again, this is an example of identifying relevant existing data for a given entity, in this case items, again saving the user time and maybe, you know, finding a relevant data set that where they might have missed something or maybe a little bit difficult for the user to identify. The final category then was chat. We've got 3 here. We've got chat with Copilot, which is the chat pane. We've got asking for help with fields, which is another way to use the chat pane. And Power Automate, which is a capability in Power Automate, not in BC, but it's reaching into Business Central so that it can see data in Business Central. And when you're using your Copilot and Power Automate, you can address data in Business Central as part of your natural language prompts. So the chat with Copilot is the most relatable feature. It's probably the one naturally that's got the most attention, since the whole ChatGPT era that kicked off, well, almost a couple of years ago at this stage. Asking a question in natural language and receiving an AI-powered response. And this is, currently it's based on Microsoft product documentation for Business Central, and any data searches are based, of course, on the standard data tables. It's not yet extended into ISV solutions or into bespoke per tenant extension tables, for example, or bespoke documentation. But you can either ask it to find some data for you to explain a field or some action within Business Central, or a guide on a process, for instance. Like the one I've just done there in the screenshot. How do I release a sales order? It's a process. What's also useful is for all the explain and guide type questions, it shares its sources at the bottom. So if you want to drill through and do some further reading, it essentially brings you to the documentation as well as giving you an answer straight away. There's also now a prompt guide. I could probably show you that briefly as well. The prompt guide allows you to, it essentially gives you template prompts. So if the user's not really sure how to begin, this can be useful. Help me understand a certain process. Is there a keyboard shortcut for a certain function? And then you can just move forward from there through your chat. Okay. So that's the chat with Copilot. Asking for help with fields is very much related to this, and it's based on the tooltip. So when you go to a field, you can ask Copilot instead of the old learn more option. So if I just go to any table quickly, and I go to the number field, here we go. Ask Copilot, and it'll say explain the field number. What I have noticed to date, which I guess will be addressed, is it doesn't always bring the context of the table with it. So this is a good example where number is a field that exists on many tables. Just my personal experience to date has been that it doesn't always identify the correct table that you come from. So you might have to say, refine it to say this field, tell me about this field in the item table. It may already be resolved. Yeah, this is a general answer, and it does give me which is correct, and it gives me a reference, which is also correct. It's behavior of the number field on documents and cards, but it hasn't quite drilled into the specific context in which I activated it. So that's something just to watch out for, but I'm sure it'll be addressed before too long. And then the Power Automate Copilot integration with BC. So if you're in Power Automate, you can now use Copilot as a way to explain or describe the flows that you want to create, such as this one. It's not the easiest to read, but when a new customer is added to BC, add an update to the sales team on Teams. And it's that piece where you can address Business Central from within the Copilot prompt, which is new. You could do it through manually creating a flow, but this is now able to actually see into Business Central and essentially allow you to use that as part of your prompt creation, which in turn builds your flow, including a trigger, here, where it's when a record is created in Business Central. Again, not yet available, but a preview initially in the US region, just like for the chats that went previously, is coming in July. Okay. On the topic of US and regions, these capabilities tend to roll out gradually across release waves at various points throughout the release waves. Most of them naturally come towards the start. So, for example, in April, But the regional availability can be a little bit unclear. Certainly for the chats, they started out in the US. So this tool from Microsoft may be useful in that context. I have it open here. It's this page, and I'll provide the link to Luc so you can include it below the recording of this webinar. But it gives you all the Microsoft products that have Copilot built into them, and you can essentially search by release wave, but also by region, and it will tell you what release wave and indeed what languages are available. So if I was to filter on Business Central and say what's in 2024 release wave 1, and then I am in, for example, let's say I was in the UK. You know, I get the ones that are there. What it doesn't tell you is which minor update or which month within the release wave it's coming in. So that's a level of detail below this, but at least it gives you an indication of what's there and what's coming when it comes to regions and availability globally. Okay. Now, this is mainly a functional webinar, but as we start to think about the next section that's coming in the webinar, there's a few development points you should know about. There is a growing suite of developer tools for Copilot in Business Central. These are based around the new PromptDialog page type, which allows you to build your own generative AI experiences with a Copilot look and feel. That can be prompting in natural language, or it can be, for example, presenting a list where you select records and then do something with those records. And it is available, and it's being enriched all the time. And you can use these in cloud and on-prem. I should have said the earlier standard capabilities, it was on one of my slides, but I didn't highlight it, are available in Business Central Cloud only. Those are the standard out-of-the-box Business Central features that are powered by AI and use Copilot. But this PromptDialog page type, where you can create your own AI-powered Copilot-like experience for users, is available on-premise as well. However, unlike the other capabilities, you need to sort out providing your own Azure OpenAI service subscription, because you need that to handle the prompt response that comes from your PromptDialog page. So that's a really useful tool coming. But as we go into the next section of the presentation, we're going to look a little bit at the business scenarios where you could, for example, take inspiration from what Microsoft have done in the concept of reducing workload for users, or identifying difficult to find data, generating text representations of data that's in the application. This tooling, this PromptDialog tooling, is a way to build those capabilities for your own specific needs and for your customer needs within Business Central. A very brief technical run through what's involved there. It's a particular page type which has a prompt area where you handle the building up of the prompt based upon the user's input or selection of data, plus any surrounding information that is needed in the prompt for it to be passed and understood correctly. There's a content area where you present the AI generated response, and then a system actions area, which, going back to the topic at the start of responsible AI and the user being in charge, you always need to give the user the option to keep, discard, or indeed regenerate the response in any of your own pages. So we'll see an example as we move through the next part, actually, of this PromptDialog page where it's being used for one of the scenarios that I'll be talking about. Okay, just one more thing before we move off standard existing capabilities. Worth knowing that outside of the Microsoft offering, there is also a very powerful app available called CentralQ Chat from Dmitry Katzin. It is available on App Source, and it is a chat experience, but where you can actually provide your own files, PDF, Word, or text, and then use a chat interface within BC when you install the app to ask questions about the content the files that you uploaded. It can also use, you can also base the responses on Microsoft Learn content and BC community knowledge. Many of you may be familiar with the CentralQ website, which has already existed for a while longer, which is also AI powered and is based on knowledge from the BC community, which Dimitri has gathered and sort of curated. But this is an app that can sit within Business Central, and it is a way today to address the need for your user to be able to ask questions about how processes work or what a particular thing does, if that functionality is not Business Central standard. So that's just worth being aware of as well. So now we're ready to move on to the next part of the webinar. At this point, Luc, I'm going to ask you if there are any questions so far.
So far, no questions.
Good. Okay.
Yeah,
We're not good. Happy to answer questions.
Loud and clear.
I mean, good as in I will move on to the next phase of the webinar. Okay, so this is about business scenarios, sort of more theoretical business scenarios, but thinking about whether they would be a good fit or not for AI solutions. In general, here are some guiding principles from my perspective of what it's best suited for. So it's, would a user or a human do the task otherwise? It's at its most powerful when it's saving users time and reducing their workload. I think that's the biggest benefit from a user perspective of Copilot in Business Central, and indeed in general. Does it involve generating or understanding natural language? This is a key differentiator, of course, from a non-AI software solution, whether it's producing text like the marketing text, or whether it's interpreting input from the user in natural language. Does it involve finding what we call the needle in the haystack? So that connection between two data points, or a piece of data, or an insight that would otherwise be very difficult or time-consuming for a human user to do. This is kind of the bank rec type scenario. And would the user normally need to use their insight or experience? So things like creating sales lines. It's not just a programmatic outcome where you insert records and based on strict rules or logic, you can always predict exactly what you're going to need. There's a little bit of kind of knowledge around the edges through insight into what's happened in the past, for example. And AI can be very useful for operating in that space where there isn't quite as much certainty based on the data that you've got. Likewise, we want to be all enthusiastic. We can do everything. You shouldn't do everything with Copilot and AI. You don't need to. There are situations where there are existing solutions, for example. So calculations and strict business logic is definitely an area. If you have well-defined, predictable inputs, very strict rules, and predictable outputs that you can code for, and there's no need for ambiguity or interpretation of any existing data, just code it like you always did. You don't need to use Copilot or AI for this. Do not attempt to use it if you're building your own solutions to avoid or minimize user responsibility. It's there to help the user. They must accept or decline any generated content. So don't try to code around this if building your own AI capabilities. And another one, it's probably not going to come up that often, but it's good to be aware of very large prompts and responses. If you're building your own capabilities, you're going to need that OpenAI service to serve them. That's going to, involved in that, you're going to need to select which level of GPT model you're using for taking in the prompts and generating back the responses. There are token limits. Tokens are the pieces of text that the large language model uses to break down words into almost like syllables, not quite, but conceptually kind of similar. And there are limits depending on the service that you're using. So if, for example, you were to build a prompt in your own bespoke AI-powered solution in Business Central that required it to iterate through every bank account ledger entry for a bank account, say, for the last 5 years, and then predict your cash flow or something like that, you might find that you exceed the allowed maximum token size, and the token limit applies to both the prompt and response together. So they're not separate. So it's the total limit for the entire cycle over and back is covered by the token limit. So just bear that in mind if you're thinking of doing some really big data queries or prompts, and likewise very large responses coming back, that you might be restricted there. In general, under the generate heading, producing text summaries of an entity or activity recorded in Business Central seems an obvious one, as a generally good place to try to use, build a solution. Taking action, finding a pattern or an insight into data that isn't easy, suggesting actions like generating new data, predicting dates, predicting amounts, suggesting large volumes of records to create that would otherwise require manual input if there's a very tedious process of filling out lines on a document or something where it's very, quite predictable and can be, you could easily explain what you want to do or set a rule and then let the Copilot do it for you. Could save a large amount of time. And chat, within the Business Central standard capabilities, chat, of course, is limited to, at the moment at least, to just those show me data, find me some data, explain or guide on functionality within the application. But I do expect that will expand rather quickly as time goes on in terms of what it can address. But it's certainly a very powerful capability. So here's a series of example scenarios that we could just food for thought, really, and they all echo back in some way to the same concepts to what Microsoft has introduced already. So this is one that actually came up through 4PS. We are active in the area of service and maintenance, and if you have a service engineer that visits a location to perform some repairs, for example, and they complete their work, it'd be good to be able to send the customer a summary of the work done to sign off, but it would be really good if you could do that in a nice written format that's automatically generated on the basis of data that's already in the service order. So without having to go and enter any template or fill in any data, just to have it use the data that's already there in Business Central to suggest a nice sort of closing statement on what they've done for sign off. And you could allow the user as well to interact before the prompt is submitted, a bit like the marketing text where you can change the emphasis, for example. So there might be certain attributes that you don't want to include, like the time spent on each individual task, for instance. It might be too much detail. They may only care about the overall time spent. So you're going to want to produce something along the lines of this, dear customer, pleased to inform you that your repair has been completed. This is the technician who did it. This is the date and time it happened, and and so on. The thing is, all of these, everything in that is available as data through the service order. So it lends itself well, in my opinion, to being used to using AI to generate text. This is one I mentioned earlier when I introduced the PromptDialog page type that I would see an example of where it's actually being used. This is credit to our colleague Bert at 4PS, where you're essentially looking at a list of historical sales invoices, selecting a subset of those, and then using those to predict the payment date of one or more open sales invoices. And it's a nice way to showcase a different kind of input. And I'm going to just go on to the next screen to show it to you. So here, instead of just a prompt field to enter text, the user is presented with this, where essentially they're selecting a range of closed entries and then selecting one or more open entries. And then on generating, it's going to go and it's going to produce, in this case, a text output. It could also just produce data as an output. You could get it to even update a date value on those lines. But this is just showcasing the different types of prompt and response that you can use within this PromptDialog page type. So based on the payment history, the customer tends to pay their invoices on the due date itself. So what's happened in the background here is the a prompt has been built up by coding the selection of the user, sorry, into a prompt text in the background. The prompt text has some surrounding context or hard coding already built into it to say what it is you're asking for, so that when it sends it out to the OpenAI service, it says something along the lines of, I'm going to present you with a list of previously paid invoices and the dates that they were due and the dates that they were actually paid on. Based on this data, I want you to tell, you know, it's doing all that writing up of the response in the background. You have to handle all that. And then wrapped up inside that, you've got the user's data selections. And that's the way that you get around having to actually ask the user to write in the text of what they want to do. And then the response is fed back in natural language. But as I say, could also have been injected back into a data record, or at least a temporary record that's shown on the Copilot page, which then the user has to either accept or, as you can see there, confirm, regenerate, or discard. Okay, another scenario which at first I was quite enthusiastic about and then kind of had second thoughts, but I've left it in just to let you sort of reflect on it, is suggesting permission sets for a new user based on other users. So a new user has joined my company, they're going to be a new BC user, and based on their user setup, I want to suggest permission sets based on users with similar setup. So I'll just jump to the next slide. I'm kind of thinking of this type of a Copilot appearing here, which would, or essentially an action appearing here, which would allow you to suggest permission sets. The thing to watch out for here is you really do need meaningful relationships between the new entity you're creating and existing data. So unless you already do a bit of work to actually profile the user, it's not going to know what other kind of users it's similar to. You're going to need to really specify what roles they have, which in a way starts into setting up the permission sets anyway. But what might be, well, there's two ways you can work around that. One is to introduce some options for the user when they're prompting to actually select one or more, just like Bert's example in the previous slide, one or more existing users to model off. That's the obvious way around it, rather than just creating it without any context or prompt like magic. I mean, it would be great if it would just do that, but I think you need to feed it a little bit more context before you get the actual a good enough prompt for it to generate the data. It might also be a good use case to do a permission set audit, because then you've got all your existing data, and what you're actually asking it to do is to go through sometimes very extensive and complex data and try to identify, for example, if there's inconsistencies between people in similar roles and also, you know, unused assignments of permission sets where they've never hit the tables that they're actually given permission to. So that could be a more useful thing where you can really act at scale and find insights that you wouldn't necessarily find yourself. So that's just an example. It isn't just about permission sets. I just use that as an example of potentially substantial and complex data where you could use it to either create new data or to find complex insights in existing data. And I showed you that already. The next two, actually, I'm shamelessly advertising my own BC ideas submissions here. There's a couple I thought might be nice from Microsoft, and I just wanted to bring them to your attention. Again, food for thought. One is the new page scripting feature, which I think is a lovely feature in BC 24. It's just come in. It records your steps, if you haven't seen it, in performing an action, and then you can replay them and essentially retest something to see that it still works, but also you can save it, you can share it. You can only save it at the moment as a YAML file, which is markup. It's readable to somebody who knows what they're looking at. But quite often in a customer scenario, especially user acceptance testing sort of scenario, your customer may require some sort of more formal written record of the of tests that you've done. And rather than using the lovely page scripting tool to actually run through and record yourself doing steps and proving that it works, wouldn't it be great if you could generate a test report in natural language based upon the steps recorded in page scripting? So I've submitted it. I'll give
I allow myself to respond. Didn't Dimitri also already build something around this?
He may have, because I say this is a very fast-moving area, and if he has, then I will reference that on the idea, and I'll
see if I can find it.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is also an idea for Business Central. You saw earlier when you can ask for help about the fields. So you go to the caption, you hover over, you get your tooltip, and then you've got your Ask Copilot. But I think if they were to take that a level further, it would be really useful to have a single common shortcut, whether it's a key and mouse click type combination, where you can just go to any control on any of your pages and essentially ask what it's about. So rather than having to hover, get the tooltip, go to the corner, click on Copilot, you don't have anything in that case either for menu items, for example, or action buttons or other UI elements. A universal shortcut essentially for prompting, for opening that chat pane and prompting it with, like you saw, explain the field number, explain the menu item X, just to be able to do that. Could be a future enhancement that would be useful in at application level in Business Central. Another scenario in a completely different context, again, text generation in this case, but based on data insights. If you're producing a report, in this case, I've used a customer top 10 report just as a simple example. If there was some way that you could build or get it to come up with some sort of insight into the data that the report is running on and that's presented in the report. So for example, that the top 3 customers account for half of the revenue, and that's up from the same period last year. You'd have to present it with quite a lot of data potentially to do that. The prompt would need to send not just the immediate data that's being shown in the report, but there may be a whole load of comparative data that you need to also wrap up and send for it to do an analysis on. But it would be interesting. It could also be a Power BI capability, because that's, I guess, where you really want to get into that analysis mode. I don't mean the analysis mode on the list pages. I mean data analysis in general. So it could be also a possibility using Copilot in Power BI. But this sort of concept where an executive summary is automatically suggested. Again, the user would have to see it before it's actually produced on the report and decide whether to accept it or not. Could also be an interesting use case for if you were looking to build something yourself to enhance your reports, especially for people who are maybe not so interested in the detail of the report, but would appreciate some sort of high-level insight. One final scenario is moving outside of Business Central, Copilot Studio. I haven't talked about Copilot Studio because I've focused on Business Central today. But Copilot Studio is a fantastic tool to allow you to build essentially an agent. It's taking the previous functionality of the Power Virtual Agents in Power Platform, powered by AI, so that you can have conversations, you can embed it in different applications, in different contexts, and build your own Copilot, essentially, and then deploy it and have people use it. I've seen it being used or built for scenarios around customer service, or ordering, where your clients can interact with this in a Teams channel or on a website, and ask about stock or place orders, and have it handle the data. And through a combination of Copilot Studio itself, will be also Power Automate, triggering different flows and actions and data to be sent and updates to be sent to various people off the back of Copilot Studio. I was then thinking about maybe setting aside just thinking about building solutions for our customers in Business Central. Is there anything we could do just for ourselves using Copilot and AI as a partner, for example? One you could do, which would be interesting, is you can control with Copilot Studio the data sources that you use for queries and responses. A bit like the CentralQ Chat that we referred to earlier, you can actually define your own data sources. It's not just using public information on websites, for example, or standard Business Central data. One thing that I've seen throughout my career is a constant inflow of these RFPs or RFQs where prospective clients are essentially asking very similar questions about your business and your functionality. What kind of, do you have a solution for a particular business process, or what's your implementation methodology, that sort of thing. But yet they're not quite presented similarly enough to just copy and paste exact answers. They always find a different angle sometimes, or the question is split in different ways. So a good use case, I think anyway, for Copilot Studio, which might help your business as well as be something that customers could use, would be to essentially allow you to question an agent that you build in Copilot Studio, where you could ask it questions and you can actually provide it with a historical set of question and answer pairings, particularly good ones. So you might discard the ones that you don't want it to reuse. But if you find that you've got a solid range of answers going back, it's potentially several years worth of responses to these things, it's very possible that you'll get very good answers to those questions using AI, because you're focusing it on your particular set of data. You could also expand it to point it to sources of information, official sources of information on your own business, for example, collateral that you've produced, website content that explains a bit about your business. And so that's something that I think is a very interesting use case for business efficiency. Of course, as always, the answers would have to be reviewed, and also you'd have to consider, as you create and log new answers, do you want to continuously feed those files back into the sources so that you're constantly building up your source data for the future? And also you might want to coach users to provide more complex prompts rather than just the questions. So you can say things like, focus on the performance benefits of our solution in answering this question. You can tailor your prompt to introduce personas and things just to get a better, more relevant answer for that particular scenario. But again, you'll need your own OpenAI subscription for this, Azure OpenAI. And that is secure as well. So if you're worried about data going outside or anything, if you're using files, your data stays in your own tenant and services that you're using with the Copilot Studio and Azure OpenAI, and isn't used to train models, or isn't shared externally like it would be, for example, when you go out to ChatGPT. This is a more closed environment. Okay, that is the end of that section. And Luc, I'm going to ask you the same question as last time.
Yeah, there was a question from René Wagner. I think I answered it in the sense of, he was asking, how does the sales line suggestion work when Copilot has no access to the data? But the sales line suggestion example or feature is inside, is BC Copilot inside your BC. That was my answer. So it has access. If you have an individual solution like you're discussing in example 7 outside of BC, then by default you don't have access to the data, right?
That's right. So the standard features like that sit within BC are only looking at the data within your BC tenant, but have access to that. It also, I didn't go into the topic of permissions and what you can see, but when a user, for example, in chat, it's often a very valid question. Can they get to data that they shouldn't be allowed to get to? And the answer is no. When the prompt goes to actually find data within your tenant based upon what you've asked it, like looking at sales lines, or if I ask it about how much I paid a vendor last month, as it goes to query the tables, it applies the permissions of the user who's logged in that session. Essentially, the person who asked are applied in determining whether or not it can access that data. So there's no separate set of permissions, for example, for using Copilot. It's just a tool at application level. But when you use it in the background, it's applying your your permissions to the queries that you're putting in.
Clear. That's it for now.
Okay, cool. I'm going to move on to the last session, and it is also the shortest, but an important one: costs and licensing. What's included in BC and what's extra? There are many co-pilots, as I mentioned at the start, and even at personal applications in Microsoft suites, you can get access to some Copilot capabilities, but it's widely spread across business applications. Then we hear about the various AI services at the back end, large language models, we have text to image, text to video. There's a lot going on, and it can be hard to keep track of what's included and not in licensing and the pricing associated with them as well. So let's have a little look at let's keep it focused around the world of Business Central. What's included? So those things I showed you in the first part of the webinar, the Copilot-driven functionality that's standard in BC, is included in Business Central licensing. So Essentials or Premium. There's no additional purchase required of any additional permission, licensing, any additional pricing to be paid. It's already included, and the same goes for anything further that's on the in the release wave that hasn't come out yet. If you're building your own capabilities within BC, they will cost extra, but only on the Azure OpenAI side. There's nothing extra on the BC side required to go ahead and start developing with those PromptDialog type pages. They're just another page type. You can create those, but for you to do anything with it, you have to take a prompt and actually send it. You need to have a service to send it to, and you'd be responsible for your customer for providing that open AI account to essentially serve that capability. So if we look at it in a summary format, standard is included, and then the Azure OpenAI. How much does that cost? Well, it's based on usage, and the thresholds are quite high, to be honest, in terms of the amount that you're allowed to do. I've just taken GPT-4 Turbo, which would be one of the more commonly used OpenAI large language models that would be used, and there's a link to pricing there. So I'll try to remember, Luke, to add that onto my list of links for you as well for all the different OpenAI services. But you're looking at $10 per million tokens input. So it's not that material unless you're really putting an awful lot of data through it. It's quite a low cost service in that sense for incidental use by a user within a business application. If we move beyond that to some of the other applications that you may encounter while working, there is also Copilot available for Microsoft 365. So you've got your Copilots to help you while you're creating PowerPoint presentations, Word documents, all those type of things, Teams also. That's $30 per user a month or equivalent local price. And it's available for all those different plans and licensing types that are listed there. Copilot Studio, where you can build and run your own Copilots across websites and other channels, which I talked about near the end of the last part, is a tenant license for that, which is just one per tenant. And then the users are included if you have your Copilot for Microsoft 365, so the one above it. Users here being people who can actually create, do something, build things with build an agent essentially. If you've got external users or others who just want to interact with it, then it just runs as a service. You don't need to license those, but you need a tenant license, and then you need the users who are going to actually use the Copilot Studio to build things and refine things. They need to be licensed, but the Microsoft 365 includes, or the €30 you're paying for the Microsoft 365 includes the Copilot Studio as well, provided you can just get the tenant license in addition. Have I got anything else on this? No, I don't, but I do have some sources of information. I've already provided those to Luke, and he's going to include them below the recording on the website, on YouTube, sorry. the additional info on Microsoft Copilot. So this is specific to Microsoft Copilot. Some product documentation, thought leadership, and technical guidance from Microsoft and from various other key people in our community. And then just more broad AI information from Microsoft, thought leadership, things like responsible AI, strategies that might be useful for interactions with decision makers at customers, for example, and mapping out digital strategies, digital transformation, etc. Okay, with that, I believe I am on to my last slide, where I've got some contact information and a thank you to everybody who joined, and indeed to Luc for inviting me. Any questions on the short final section that I just presented?
And you are more than welcome to be here, Niall. The question of René, there is one part left, and he wrote it like this. One thing is still unclear to me, or perhaps I misunderstood it. If, for example, I want to implement a function similar to sales line suggestion in purchasing, do I also have the opportunity to access the data in BC if I use Azure OpenAI, for instance?
Sorry, I missed just before you said Azure OpenAI. Can you just repeat the previous sentence?
Let's say he built something like sales line suggestion for the purchase side. And do I also have the opportunity, as he writes, to access data in BC if I use Azure OpenAI, for instance? So if he would use Azure OpenAI on the outside.
Because your Azure OpenAI subscription is yours. It's not a public. It's not a public service. It's an individual one for you. So when you go from your PromptDialog page, which is the BC page that you would use to interact with the user, that if you imagine you had an action on your purchase order, for example, it would pop up a page where you would either input a prompt or select from some predefined options, filters, and then say, suggest me some lines. At that point, it builds up a prompt. At that point, it accesses your BC data, just your data in your tenant, and it connects to your Azure OpenAI subscription, just yours. It's not a shared one with anybody else, it's just yours. And that data is not shared anywhere else. It's closed within that loop. It's just using Azure OpenAI in the cloud essentially as a service that you've subscribed to, and that same service passes back the response into BC. But all that's passing between the in the prompt and response is just text, right? It's not actually passing tables. It's not referencing specific entities in BC. It's just building up a very large text string essentially based upon data that's in BC. So it could be document number, it could be dates, just the relevant data from existing lines. It could be product attributes plus quantities purchased in the past and a few things like that, and then getting a response back. So it's a closed, it's a private subscription essentially that you've got to an Azure OpenAI service. It's building up a text prompt based on data in BC. Inside BC, before it goes out, it's querying those tables and building the prompt, and that's where it'll also fail if you don't have permission to access those tables. But all it's presenting at the end is text to the Azure service, and likewise the service sends back a text response, and you may, through code, you may need to parse and interpret and do something with that response before you present it back in that page to the user. So it is a closed environment. Okay, clear. There's no other question. There was one compliment from Olaf Jorritsma. Good informational session. Well done. And nicely timed. Just 1 minute left, you could say. So let me share my screen to thank you all for being here, and especially you, Niall. As Olaf said, very informational, some nice business examples, and surely, let's say, a couple of rules you set up to take into account when you're going to, well, do your part on trying to find out some nice business cases. So let's say that's it for today. Hope to get you on the show
to be present on the show, anybody, in 4 weeks' time. There's a hole in between because of Dynamics Minds conference where a lot of people are heading, and I'm also there, so there will be no webinar at that day. So once again, thanks for being here, Niall, and everybody else, and see you again later.
Thank you.